who have been embedded in these issues for some time. And I'd like to just quickly introduce the panel, or maybe even better again, I'll just ask the panel maybe quickly to just introduce themselves, who they are and who they represent. Michael, could I just kick off yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, Michael O'Donoghue, I'm the country director at WAVN Ireland, and I'm also the president of the Hardware Association of Ireland, which represents merchants and suppliers.
Thanks, Michael. Paul?
Yeah, good afternoon, Kieran. My name is Paul Mulvihill, purchasing director with Brooks and managing director with DPV Limited.
Thank you. Colin?
Yeah, good afternoon at this stage. Yeah, so I'm a tax partner with PwC, and I also head up our construction industry group here within the firm.
Ronan?
Good afternoon, everyone. How you doing? I'm purchasing manager in Clondalkin Builders Providers.
John?
Hi, Kieran. Yeah, I'm John Devereux, supply chain director for John Sisk & Son for the Irish and European business.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. I suppose the best way to frame up the conversation would be to probably look at how things progress. So sort of pre-Brexit. And hindsight is a wonderful thing, but there are lessons that can be learned, I suppose, to how others approach Brexit. John, I'd like to start with you, if I may. What level of preparation did you and Sisk do in preparation for Brexit?
Yeah, so I think it started really back in 2016 when the UK decided to leave the EU. And quickly we engaged our partners in PwC, and we've done a lot of work over the last number of years in preparation for Brexit. Mainly around, like at the start, we started looking at the cost implications on projects. So we picked a number of our big projects at the time, and we did some cost analysis against those projects, but based on the scenario where WTO tariffs would have came into effect, you know. So we based it on that and did a bit of supply chain mapping to see where our supply chain was coming from, and we went as far upstream as possible, I suppose. So not just with the suppliers and distributors in Ireland, but back to where those products were manufactured and so on. So there was a lot of preparation done in that regard. I think as well as that, like every job that we would have priced since then or bid since then, we would have had clients asking us the question as to what the potential Brexit impact is for my project. So we would have had to do a lot of work around that to map what the risk for those projects would have been. So certainly, yeah, look, we've been living with this since 2016 as a supply chain function, procurement department. It's been core to our strategy for the last number of years, you know. And more recently, I suppose, just, you know, late last year, what we did, we kind of ramped it up in terms of the kind of knowledge and education for our own people, but also our supply chain. So we held a number of webinars, which were delivered by PwC for our supply chain and our internal team. So the external one, we would have had over 100 of our subcontractors attending that. And it just went through all the different scenarios and how best to plan for Brexit and so on, you know. So a lot of work, to say the least, and it's ongoing. You know, things are changing constantly. We're starting to really get into the guts of the TCA agreement that was agreed, and that's throwing up a lot of surprises as well, you know. So it's ongoing, Kieran. Yeah.
You mentioned PwC there. Colin, in 2019, you worked alongside the CIF in conducting a report which was titled Brexit and the Irish Construction Sector. What were the major concerns of the companies that you surveyed at the time?
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. And to step in, like a lot of the issues back in 2019 are probably still very, very relevant right now, to be brutally honest. I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit a minute ago in your intro, whereby in reality, due to level 5 lockdown more recently and COVID and everything, probably the construction industry hasn't yet properly fully faced Brexit day one. But I suppose back in 19, when companies were looking forward, and as part of the survey we did with CIF, some of the concerns being, you know, raised at the time were things like, you know, the likely rise in cost of raw materials, subcontractor and supply chain difficulties, you know, an overall kind of macro loss in economic activity within the economy, you know, as a result, and whether that would impact then the construction sector. some of the points that I suppose John was talking to there, businesses were worried about, did their supply chain, have the knowledge, did they themselves have the knowledge or the capability to deal with customs and some of the paperwork even around it. And at the time back in 19, we were obviously planning for a very hard Brexit. But I suppose the overarching concern, Kieran, to be brutally honest, back in 19 was our, a lack of readiness, right? Because when you talk to every company, every construction group, big or small, they were all grappling with how are they going to get ready for day one. And there was this kind of great mantra of day one readiness. And, John spoke a little bit there about what they've done in CISCs to get ready. But, some of the things that we would have been talking to the likes of CISCs and others were around, kind of at a very simple level. Does the company have the necessary customs experience or capability? So has it got all the filings like the EROI number ready, ticked, ready to go for 1 January? Has it got a customs agent in place to do the paperwork? Has it got a mechanism and an ability to effectively cash flow the duties if there is duties? Because, we weren't sure. Do they have an ability to cash flow or deal with the VAT on the import? And we can touch on that later, because in reality, that shouldn't be a cost, but we're still finding it is a cost for a lot of companies bringing in goods and materials and stuff like that. And then finally, did they understand the rules and regs, the kind of non-tariff rules and regs? And they've, we've seen them already throw off a couple of funnies for some other sectors, like in the retail and so on, in terms of, it was only when it went live, Brexit went actually live in 1 January, that some of these started to crop up, and you kind of said, hey, that wasn't what was intended. No one foresaw it. And that's causing difficulties as well. So I suppose, stepping back, there's probably still time, because back to the opening comment, we've yet really in reality as a construction sector to hit this day one because of the lockdown, and to some degree because some companies also were able to a little bit stockpile ahead some goods and materials in kind of late Q4. So the need for massive inpull of materials probably still hasn't yet hit.
Yeah. And Michael, if I could bring this one over to you, I mean, to sort of get an idea of what has played out, I suppose. In that same report that Colm's talking about, 80% of respondents said that the increased cost of materials in a post-Brexit environment was the number one business concern for the construction sector. But now that that's starting to play itself out, in the early days, what have we seen to date in terms of increased cost on our materials?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of delays initially in terms of teething problems. There was a general, as it has been said, lack of preparation. The basics around just registering for an EORI number, etc. A lot of exporters just weren't ready. Hadn't got the paperwork in place. Hadn't really considered the VAT implication, having the VAT declaration for imports into Ireland, routing goods through Northern Ireland into the Republic, all of that sort of stuff. Even in terms of the freight fulfillment, the general experience was that if it was a full load, then it was less delays, but if it was groupage, then there tends to be more delays. So that's sort of initial teething period. And I think what was also said, just in relation to the sort of volume of transactions, because we are in this COVID situation, there is a bit of a concern that the system hasn't been properly tested yet. That, in the weeks and months ahead, particularly as we get into hopefully a post-COVID construction sector going forward in April, that volumes will increase significantly coming into a busier time of year, and that the Irish customs on our side hasn't been properly and fully tested in that scenario. So all of this had delay to some extent has added cost. There are then some specific sectoral issues because of that delay in getting some imports in. For example, in the timber sector here domestically, there's an issue over felling license, which is causing a delay. But on the other side of it, imported products been held up because of the additional admin requirements in a post-Brexit situation. And then there's just generally across different sectors, there are raw material and other supply issues in the wider European and international arena, which are fueling cost increases, which just happen to all happen at the same time around the perfect storm around Brexit.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I suppose then, Paul, on from your point of view, then on the merchant side, like what materials, what products have been affected by customs issues, or how is this, I suppose, impacting your customers?
Yeah, I think, following on from the guys that spoke already, Kieran, Brexit has had an impact on our business. But I know we've brought in now over the last 2 months about 100 loads a month. January was difficult, and it was more around the paperwork issue. And I have to say, more from a UK side than an Irish side. The tax, the VAT numbers, all that kind of stuff just became a bit of a hassle. I think, in fairness, the lockdown, to some degree, well, no one wants a lockdown, came at the right time, because it's given us a number of weeks to get over some of the paperwork headaches. But the days of getting stuff out of the UK to 2 to 3 days, forget it. It's just not going to happen. It's realistically, it's a 2-week program now. John alluded to a little earlier on, there's some other nuances in it. So if a product comes from Germany and goes into the UK, there's no duty on it because of the Brexit deal. But if that product then leaves the UK and comes into Ireland, it can be subject to duty. So there's all these little nuances that none of us knew about or weren't 100% clear about. That is going to add a cost onto product. And that product, I know we'll talk about commodities further on in the conversation, but that's across the board. It's from a bucket of screws to, a roll of insulation. But our findings at the moment would be, from just a paperwork point of view, on general commodity item, it's probably going to add 1% onto the cost. That seems to be where it's sitting at. But I think that and Michael also alluded to, there's a bigger issue here, and it's not just Brexit. It's what's happening in the world. Europe, America, economic turmoil. I don't know if that's the correct term for it, but there are a number of forces coming into play that realistically, while the UK market is an important supplier to the Irish market, the cost of Brexit and the paperwork will be minimal in comparison to some of the worldwide cost, demand, freight, shortages, all that kind of stuff is going to have a much bigger impact on costs and availability than Brexit on its own. While it's important, it is only a small part to the overall increase in costs.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And Ronan, I suppose to throw this one across to yourself. I mean, there has been suggestions out there, I suppose, that Irish merchants might bypass a lot of the issues that Paul has been talking about there in the UK and maybe move to mainland Europe to source products. Is that a strategy that's being considered by you?
I suppose merchants, are always trying to work with the suppliers they have on board and finding ways around the problems more than, I suppose, looking for alternatives, suppliers say. But in regards to sourcing and supplying some of the products, I think some of the suppliers have already made changes already to the way they've been transporting the goods or shipping the goods from different destinations. As Paul was saying there earlier on, some of them, if you're buying the product that's coming from Germany, they're nearly trying to ship it, beforehand, maybe it went through England. That's probably not happening so much. They're trying to find ways around not going through the English channel, if you want to say. I suppose to answer the question for us, if it was the right deal and you could do it, we probably wouldn't say no to it. But it has pros and cons. It's not as easy done as it probably sounds to other people. So there's a lot of pitfalls involved too. So it can, current climate is probably a little bit more difficult as well when you're getting an alternative supplier with lack of supply, demand outstripping supply. All of that brings an alternative supplier to a different. It's a tricky situation at the moment. Yeah. You've built up a relationship with suppliers here, and when you've built up a good relationship, depending on who you get it off, it probably makes it a little bit easier. If you're trying to get a new supplier on board, it's in and out.
Yeah, John, I suppose what we're hearing there on the supply side is that there will be delays. There's obviously other issues there, as Paul's touched on, that are starting to come to head, and I suppose what the result is that we have a problem now with goods basically reaching our suppliers, and then that's obviously going to have effect on our projects. You were chatting the other day, and you've seen this already with a simple example of a delay with the paving, for example. Can you talk about what happened there?
Yeah, so we had a project in Dublin that required a small little plastic spacer, a little T spacer for a permeable paving slab. And the order was it's about £2,000. Wasn't a big order. And we couldn't source it in Ireland. You know, we talked to all the paving manufacturers. They all said, yeah, that comes out of the UK, this specific spacer. So we found a supplier in England and ordered it. They were used to selling to Irish customers all the time, you know, but fastly realised that they just weren't prepared for the paperwork side of it, you know. So we were over and back, you know, it took a few days over and back, and they were trying to sort it out with their own transport provider in the UK. And in the end, we got a freight company in Dublin to go and get it and deal with the paperwork, because they just were kind of clueless about it, you know, and didn't seem to want to help too much. You know, it wasn't a big order for them, but you can imagine the impact for us. So it took what usually a day, 24 or 48 hour turnaround for that product to land on site in Dublin. It took 2 weeks, and that too, it was for paving to go down. The project was almost finished, so it wasn't a major impact. There was other works that could have gone on, but it could have been a critical path, which would have delayed the project by 2 weeks. We all know the cost of delays in construction projects. So something simple like that we're finding is causing us major concerns, you know. So and something to look out for.
And I presume CISC, like most, receive, you know, January updates, and let's say our product material cost increases, fluctuation, that type of stuff. I mean, what did this year's price increases look like in terms of previous years?
Yeah, so like even late last year or most of last year for certain products like timber and so on, there was you know, it was an increase every 3-4 months on timber. But this year, yeah, in January, you're used to, you know, coming back after Christmas, you'll have a number of letters or emails saying, look, it's usually low single digit increases, and mainly down to inflation and so on. That's all fine, it's normal business. But this year it was, you know, more kind of high single digits into double digit stuff, some very high increases, 15-20% on certain products. So it is concerning. And look, I know the gents mentioned before, it is the perfect storm. You know, there's a number of factors going on, and it is hard. It's hard to accept a lot of them. You know, you don't have a choice in a lot of cases, but we do, you know, as an end user, I suppose we do need to go back and question everything. You know, and even, you know, distributors that are getting increases from manufacturers, we need to understand why they're coming through. You know, because, you know, if we go to a client of ours and say, oh, you know, suddenly your job's gone up by X, it's due to the increases in materials. Well, they'll go, well, you need to explain exactly why that is, you know, and we can't just say, oh, it's because of Brexit or it's because of admin costs due to customs procedures or COVID. It's going to be a number of those things. So we need to understand what that makeup is, you know, and if we're explained that's the case, then that's the case. But we're just a bit cautious as to just accepting, you know, an increase for the sake of it. You know, we have to look into it a bit more. But that's been the difference. You know, it's been a major difference this year. And
I'm gonna stay with you because I know you've got to duck off a little bit earlier. So I'll fire this one at you while I have you. A lot of our audience here today will be operating smaller businesses, to say CISC. So what advice would you have for those companies that are now facing, you know, the issues that we're talking about here, maybe supply issues, price increases? What advice could you have for maybe other companies to deal with that?
Yeah, well, I'd say on the Brexit side, I would, you know, plan as far ahead as you can and order your products in advance if you can. You know, I know there's cash flow implications and all that, but if you can, if you're bringing product in from the UK, definitely allow yourself an extra 2 or 3 weeks just to get the paperwork in order. you might have done all the work in the world and been organized, you might be familiar with all the procedures, but it doesn't matter if the supplier isn't familiar, if your transport company isn't familiar. Everyone in that supply chain has to be on the same page, or else there's going to be a fall down. So allow yourself extra time. I would say that, even though there is price increases, there's, a number of commodities seem to have kind of peaked now, and you would hope that you would start seeing a downward trend on some products, especially steel and reinforcement, and galvanized product like that. So I'd stay close to your own suppliers, call them regularly, pick up the phone, just get their take on where the market is going, and keep informed really, because if you're pricing projects today, in a month's time, your product might have gone up, it might have gone down. So that regular kind of contact between yourselves and your own suppliers is key, I think, I'd also say, look, and I mentioned being Brexit prepared, you can never learn enough, I think, on Brexit. There's constantly webinars that are been put on that are free of charge. There's courses that are free of charge on customs duties. Just educate yourself as much as you can. It won't cost you anything, just your own time, because it's good to be armed with that type of information. At least you can, you might be able to help a supplier in the UK to say, look, this is what you need to do. And it might speed things up by a couple of days. That might be key to yourself, And I would look at as well, if you have projects coming down the line, if it's a job that's, might have a bit of steel in it, that's 6 months away, look at where you think steel is in 6 months' time. And, it is quite high at the moment, but can you wait? Can you wait 3-4 months and purchase it then and wait for that drop off? There is a risk involved because it's so turbulent at the moment. We don't know where it's going to go. But from looking at the commodity tracking tools that we would use, there is a bit of a peak showing a drop off into Q2, Q3 this year. So timing is key on your purchasing decisions. So that's as much as I could probably give right now, Kieran. Yeah.
Okay, I'm interested to hear what everyone else, and I'm going to just bring in people at this stage. That there is a Q&A option here, and you can pop questions in there, and we'll hopefully be able to get to a few at the end. But I'd like to put a little poll together just and invite everyone to sort of contribute if possible. And it's around that point that we highlighted, the 2019 report that stated 80% of respondents had said that the cost of materials in a post-Brexit environment was their number one concern for the construction sector at that time. But what I'd like to do now is ask a question to the audience, and just to get a feel for what concerns are at the moment. So Leslie, if you could pop that poll together, which is what is your top business concern in 2021? So there's a couple of options there. The impact of COVID restrictions, the increased costs of materials in a post-Brexit environment, a loss of confidence in the industry due to many factors, so compounding issues, some of what we're talking about today, some other issues, or we always have a lot of people who are still actually really optimistic with what's coming ahead and say, yeah, okay, we have got some issues, but overall I'm actually optimistic, and a lot of that comes down to the resilience we have got in the industry. So just to give us a feel for what's out there at the moment and what people are generally feeling, if you could just pop that in. Leslie, you'll be able to pop the results up then once they're in, I'm sure. And there will be, as I say, the Q&A is there, and we will try and get to some questions. So feel free to pop them in. We'll come back to that, the result on that poll. Colm, if we could pop it back over to yourself. PwC work with some of the large companies in the industry, and what are you seeing with some of the larger companies within the industry? How are they dealing with some of the issues that we're outlining here today?
Yeah, thanks. I think, to be honest, John touched on a good few of them already in terms of what's been planned from a CISC's perspective and how they've got involved in it. But I mean, I suppose what a lot of the bigger guys have been doing in the sector have been kind of looking at the new supply chains. Can they source directly from suppliers in the UK, from the EU, or distributors from the EU, rather than having to rely on the kind of heretofore market being the UK as the main point to go to. They've invested heavily in customs experience, because we've heard and talked a bit so far today about, just not having things, ready, the paperwork, the kind of the experience down the chain in terms of who your logistics supplier is and all that can massively impact. So having it ready and like you'll have heard John spoke about, kind of linking in with them. And, in Cisco's case, we would have even been involved in helping them talk to their supply chain, like to make sure it was ready. Now that's not going to be practical for everyone, but that's certainly something you should be doing, yourself, to kind of wonder and understand where is your distributor getting it from. If the distributor is in the UK, well, are they sourcing it from the EU or is it outside? And I'll come back to some of those points in a minute. Some increase their inventory, right? So like I suppose it kind of goes back to the point the guys were talking about. If you've got a bit of a lead time and you can afford it, maybe buying it now in advance so that you're going to need it because you've got a project coming, get it now so it's ready there, and you're not kind of going to get impacted by delays and timing that might have on your delivery of the project. Brexit clauses, we saw them popping up and popping into a lot of contracts, certainly from kind of 12 months back, to give the big guys the ability to go back and say, costs have increased and here's why, but gave them the scope to have those conversations. Whereas, absent that, very difficult, certainly through the first wave of contracts, to kind of say, well, hang on, steel has gone up significantly here because of Brexit or whatever it is, and look for that price increase. Because the best one in the world, a lot of purchasers might just turn around and say, no, that's your problem, guys. So to bear that in mind. Funny enough, to be honest, Kieran, what a lot of the larger guys are still dealing with is actually not so much around the movement of goods and materials. It's actually around the movement of people, because they will have projects north of the border, they'll have projects in the UK. And it's some of that softer stuff around Brexit that, free movement of people was still supposed to happen. And it does in the main between Ireland and the UK because of the common travel area between the two countries. But we all know that, let's say, not everyone working in our companies are Irish. Some of them could be French, could be German, whatever. And moving those people now over for a period of months or something on site in the UK or vice versa is causing huge difficulties with visas and so on. And that's taken an awful lot of time to plan. So actually, they're the bigger challenge now that we're finding with a lot of the large construction firms. It's trying to get the movement of people right.
Interesting is because as that poll there pops up. So for those on the call, they can see the results of that. For those watching the recording, basically the impact of COVID restrictions is the top concern by 24%. Followed by 28% increased cost of materials. And then we have got a good quarter of the call here that are in my boat and are optimistic about the year ahead. So a quarter of that. But no, that gives us a fair snapshot of what people are thinking. Leslie, thanks for that. The movement of people is interesting, Colin. And Michael, if I can shift this over to yourself, if I may. The movement of product, in terms of when we've been so associated to sharing regulations and product specifications and stuff like that, how will some of the issues that we're highlighting here today affect regulations and specifications around product?
Well, it's unknown, particularly given now that the UK has diverged from the European standards, and they're going to go on their own route. So that's going to have implications for product standards and specifications, because heretofore it was covered by the construction products regulation, and you had EU standards in relation to certification and CE marking. And now that requires, for those exporters will need to have in place their own type approval to meet the requirements for exporting into EU countries. And it could be that certain products which would have had the same standards will diverge, and that may have implications in terms of manufacturing and supply chain, so that a UK-based manufacturer will produce version X for the EU and version Y for its own domestic market. And look, all of this uncertainty, just harping on to what Colin and John said, all of this is lengthening the supply chain potentially, recognizing that there are delays in that supply chain. I think there's an onus then to understand that, to plan for it, whether that means that local stocking is increased. Just in terms of our own business, we had a very strong demand from our customers in Northern Ireland in December, all of whom were gearing up significantly for stock around the uncertainty in relation to Brexit. So if that means that there's more stock in the supply chain, I think that's something. I know there's a cash element there in bringing that in, which might necessarily appeal to everyone, but having an understanding too in terms of realistic dates and expectations. So as can often happen the case, and many projects can happen, decisions made on a Friday and an order is placed on a Monday, and there's an expectation that goods are on site on Tuesday. And I think you have to have an understanding now, given the uncertainty internationally and due to Brexit, that that's not going to be the case. And that puts pressure on everyone in that chain. So I think just to plan and to for that as best as possible. Okay.
Paul, I just want to wind it back a sec, because it's popped up twice here on the call, and it was the cost, the problems around timber. I suppose Brooks would be fairly well renowned for the timber. What have you seen, I suppose, in the area of timber and plywood in particular, and how do you see that playing out over time?
Okay, well, I think Michael alluded to it earlier. There's a well publicised or well documented fact that there is an issue with Irish forestry around license granting, etc. Now, while there's been government legislation passed to move that along, there's still about an 8-month lead or an 8-month tail of appeals within the system. That has been, lengthened by the COVID restrictions and the inability of the councils to meet and to adjudicate on the appeals around the logging license issue. So, from our perspective and what the likes of the big sawmills are saying, there's another 8 months before this is really going to be sorted out to any great degree. I know, the likes of Glennon's, Murray's and others are bringing raw logs in from Scotland, Wales, UK, to keep the sawmills going and can keep the construction sector fed. I know GP are importing raw lumber from Belgium and machining it here to Irish standards. So they are working around trying to ensure that there is timber within the Irish marketplace. Importing or bringing in any raw material and then trying to saw it is always going to be a lot dearer than picking it up locally, because of its weight and size, etc. So transport costs become a significant part of it. You could say, well, then, sure, that's grand. Why don't, the distributors import from Europe? And I think this is really the bigger part of the nub, in that, Ireland, while a buoyant construction market, and we have one, it's small in comparison to the rest of the world. To put it into perspective, the US are willing to pay 25 to 30% more for raw timber than Europe is. So if I'm a sawmill and throwing out 8 million cubic meters a year, where am I going to send it to? I'm going to send it to the market that's willing to pay the most. So the Americas market is up, as I said, 25 to 30% dearer. So we have seen, and the market has seen, and unfortunately, it has to be pushed the whole way through the supply chain. But we've seen price increases in timber of anywhere in the region from December 2019 up to today of around 35%.
Okay.
There's not an awful lot the sawmills can do, because they're buying a limited amount of logs. Replacement costs from Europe, which historically has always been 10 or 20 euros ahead of native prices. And again, you throw your transport into that and it'll probably account for it. They can't supply the market either. So you have a big wave, or a perfect tidal wave, coming in two different directions. And that isn't going to sort itself out quickly in any shape or form. I think we've reached the max. I think John kind of said it about steel. I think we've reached the tipping point, or as high as it's going to get. I've been doing this for 25 years. It's never been any higher than it is today. but I don't see it ending in the next 2 to 3 months. I think it's a Q3, Q4 situation. I know when I'm going out trying to buy timber in Europe, their order books are filled up until Q4. So we're a long way out. I think there'll be a bit of stability coming into the pricing, but I don't see it coming back down in any great shape or form.
Okay, interesting.
If we talk, just sorry, Kieran, if we want to talk about plywood from the Far East and China, again, believe it or believe it not, the raw material or the base cost hasn't increased in any great significant amount, 2 or 3% inflation or whatever you want to call that, normal inflation. The issue is around shipping. Shipping costs have gone from $2,500 up to $10,000, $12,000 a box. Now, I know most guys on this call are going, sure, what does that mean to me? It means absolutely nothing. You know, you're throwing numbers at me. The reality of it is, if I take a sheet of 18 mil plywood, that equates to €6 a sheet increase in cost. That's the reality of it. Now, again, you know, Ireland bringing 100,000 boxes a year or whatever that number is, it's so insignificant in the worldwide scheme of things that, you know, we are, I won't say puppets on a string, but we have to follow it. We don't have, the economy doesn't have the strength to control that price of that shipping commodity. Are shipping lines taking advantage of COVID and all the other problems that is? Yeah, possibly are. Or probably are. I don't even think possible, probably are. But again, that's a dynamic, you know, that's going to take another 6 to 9 months to work out. So, you know, from a plywood, softwood position, I don't think supplies will get any tighter. I think they'll normalize somewhat over the next number of months, but it will be at a price. And, you know, I think the real crucial thing for everybody, and I'm talking as a distributor and decisions we have to make on a daily and weekly basis, is, do I pay the high price and have the goods? Or if I don't pay, I won't have anything to sell, or I won't have anything to use. And, you know, while I think we've reached the troughs, we've reached the peak, there might be a little bit more, but I don't think too much. Supply is going to be the king.
Okay, we've heard there about timber, ply, steel's been mentioned. Ronan, outside of these core materials that we associate with our projects, what other materials or products are you seeing affected by, let's say, severe price increase or potential supply issues?
Without trying to be funny, I suppose it's nearly a list of. It started off, obviously, probably sheet materials was the big one back in, you know, pre-Christmas, all that. It's nearly, you know, across all of last year, it's been you know, 90% of the products we sell in-house or any merchant sells has probably been affected. You know, sanitary ware is probably hardest hit. Again, Paul's touching a lot of that stuff's Far East, containers, you know, pre-planning. It's been held up due to, you know, supply issues. Components from the Far East as well has held up issues and put prices up on certain items, you know. I know everyone else, probably power tools, hand tools, you know, there's other stuff been affected by, again, Far East, containers, all this, all that has had a knock-on effect. But I'm not trying to be, you know, trying to be funny in the game, and I'm doing this a long time. It's affected, like everyone alluded to, there's a price increase. John said it, you get a price increase list in January, and it could be, genuinely, it could be 10 lines or 10 certain lines of products or suppliers that are impacted. This year it's been 30, 40, 50, and it's showing no signs of slowing up either. And again, that's been driven by, you know, transport costs, shipment costs, shortages, transport costs because of delays. They're now adding in, believe it or not, they're adding in a surcharge because they're getting delayed in ports across Europe. So that has a knock-on effect to prices as well. So, like, you know, I think the concept out there people think is that the merchants or suppliers are all putting the price increases up for the sake of putting a price increase every year. That's not the case. This time around, it's definitely not the case. You know, it's had a knock-on effect on from, you know, tubes of silicone because the tube or the cartridge, buckets of paint last year, there was a problem with it. believe it or not, because the buckets are brought in from the Far East or from, couldn't get shipments in. So it's had a knock-on effect. I think commodities, Paul said it, John said it as well. I think commodities have seen their peak now. I think they're at an all-time peak now. I think actually, I would have never said this. I think softwood timber has now become a commodity. So that has now fallen into that sort of problem as well. And as Paul said earlier, I think this could go on 3, 6, 9 months. That doesn't show any sign of slowing down. But to answer the question, it's probably been, 80 to 90% of the products have been affected across the board.
Okay. And Michael, from Wavin's point of view then?
Yeah, I mean, I can resonate with all of that, and I can give you a direct personal experience from the PVC perspective. So there's been sharp increases in PVC raw materials since October last year, and it's been brought about in the European context by a supply issue. There are just 2 manufacturers who supply the raw material, and strangely, because of the COVID situation in Europe, they ramped down production and supply because there was less demand. And then when they went to gear up again, coming into the autumn winter period, they had various production issues in their core plants, and that's of course fueled the shortage. And then ironically, the bad weather in the US a couple of weeks ago in Texas, where a lot of the US suppliers are based, that it has an impact on the American market. And then suddenly, as Paul said, there's big demand coming from the States, from the European suppliers, all of which just adds to price. So in Wavin's context, hand on heart, we're actually hand to mouth at the minute in terms of sourcing our raw material to meet our March production plan. And we have, as of yet, with March is on Monday, we've about 75% of our raw material requirements, and we're still chasing demand to secure for the rest of the month and into April. And that's facing all PVC manufacturers, and it's just fueling significant increases at levels which I would have never seen before.
Interesting. Paul, are we dealing with a complex sourcing issue, which it certainly sounds like we are, or are we dealing with something that could potentially be resolved with proper planning, much better organisation on the contractor side? You're just on mute there, Paul.
My initial answer is, yeah, it is a complex buying issue. It is, between logistics, pricing, the whole lot. And I think we have to be a little careful here, because we're not saying there isn't product available on the market. Of course there's product available on the market. There may not be the X brand of hammer sitting on a shelf, but there'll be the Y, there'll be the Z. There will be something there. The issue comes around, when we start talking about commodity products. Michael again talked about how much raw material he has to make so many lengths of 4-inch Wavin Sewer. How many sheets of OSB are sitting in ad builders yards distribution center if he's on allocation. And again, I don't want to start saying, we aren't going to have products to build. Yes, we are going to have products to build. The issue really is that if you need 1,000 lengths of 4-inch pipe for a project starting on the 7th of May, there's no point coming to a distributor or a manufacturer on the 6th. You've got to be having that conversation in March, in April. Get your price. Absolutely. Shop around. You're well entitled to do that, and contractors are extremely good at doing that. But the real issue is going to be who's going to be able to supply it to you. Because if Wavin can only make 1,000 lengths and there's a demand for 1,200 lengths, Michael may be able to get the 1,200 lengths for the market, but he can't get it in a day's time. Mm-hmm. I can't get the 2,000 sheets of OSB in a day's time. If I know it's in a month's time, I can work around it, or I can say you can have 1,000 week 1, you can have 500 week 2, you can have 500 week 3. And again, not to belittle anyone, but if we take CIS, who were on and John was on, CIS are very good at saying, I know in June I'm going to need 1,000 sheets of power foam. what's the price going to be, and nailing that down there and then. So then A, the distributor knows he has a sale, so he get it in, and B, that you have a firm price on it. But the coming around and saying I need 1,000 or 2,000 or something is going to be challenging this year. I'm not talking about the smaller jobs. They'll be taken care of. You know, distributors will have their normal stock levels or near enough to it. It's the bigger, it's the one-offs that no one is aware of what's going to cause the real difficulties in the marketplace.
Okay, so then, Ronan, I suppose if I'm a contractor, I'm heading up a procurement department, what advice can you give me then to help combat these supply issues and concerns?
I think just Paul's touched on it. Like planning a schedule is definitely is great for all of us. You know, it makes it a lot easier to go to any supplier for us to try and you know, get stock, as Paul said, get it at a price and hammer it down. If they can, it's not always easier. It's definitely improved. I've definitely seen even smaller contractors have improved at getting, you know, to the CISC level, not to the CISC level, but you know, other contractors have definitely improved. Residential companies have improved. Someone in an office now, they're definitely more up to speed of what's going on in the outside world regarding pricing and price issues and supply issues. But like, if I was to say to anyone, I would say, you know, a lot of this stuff is built on relationships. So we all know over time, especially the building game in Ireland, it's built on relationships. Even, you know, the merchants, be it suppliers, distributors, the whole game. It's a small enough country to know nearly everyone involved. So what I would say to you is go back to your, you know, your distributor or your suppliers. As Paul said, you can go to any of them you want. But I think John touched on it earlier on. If you're dealing with people already and have done business with them over a number of years, it's probably easier go to the guy that you've done, you know, could be a couple of merchants you're dealing with. Go and speak to them. John said, you know, stay in touch, maybe a phone call, you know, every week. What's happening with this? I'm going to need, you know, definitely getting schedules, getting the product, maybe, I know this sounds mad, on site or practically on site, that we can leave it in a corner of a yard for you, or put your name on it and plan ahead. So I suppose you could say the word planning is probably what you're there to do. Like, definitely if you have a relationship with companies already, definitely that's something that I, you know, when this all went, you know, a bit pear-shaped last year, you know, if you've had built a relationship with a supplier, or the same vice versa for a builder with a merchant, it's probably paid off now with supply issues. You've probably had an easier gain. If you're going to a new merchant looking for supply and he's already got, you know, a number of customers already on his books and he's trying to, you know, see them out, he's probably going to try and, you know, push you back, or not push you back, but, you know, it's a hard one to do. But I would say for anybody, I would say planning. And if you can get a schedule to people, it definitely helps. I know it's not easy and stuff changes, but a schedule is brilliant.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Colin, I'd like to roll it back to a point there you made earlier on, which has been rolling around my head, and it's really that construction has been mostly locked down. Most of the industry's been locked down. They're sort of giving out figures that we could be 30-40% somewhere around that open since January, and now that's going to look like to be extended into April, meaning that we essentially haven't seen full demand yet on our goods. And I suppose, has the post-Brexit Irish customs systems even been tested yet?
I think the simple answer, Kieran, is no in relation to the construction sector. I know we're hearing stories on this session here, right? But the reality is it hasn't until that really opens up. But we are seeing issues with other sectors, you know. So you will have all seen things where Marks and Spencer suddenly had difficulty getting stuff on the shelves. And I think one of the speakers there acknowledged it earlier with the kind of the Percy Pig example. And if I just put that into kind of, you know, these are the kind of things that are going to really crop up suddenly on top of all of us in the sector. Let's say, and it's all got to do with quite a technical term called rule of origin, right? Rule of origin doesn't necessarily mean where it originally came from, but it does define how it's treated from the free trade agreement that we reached with the UK. So if I give the example, the Percy Pig one was a perfect one. But let's say you've got, you know, sanitary ware being made or something like that being made in Italy and it's being exported to the UK, they can put a country of origin or source of origin as being EU going into the UK, and therefore in the main, no duty should apply, right? Now that's fine. The minute it lands into the UK though, and is maybe with a distributor or, you know, a wholesale or someone over there, it changes. So even though it was originally manufactured in the EU, if you try and bring it into Ireland, it doesn't have a country of origin back in the EU. It doesn't have a country of origin because it wasn't manufactured in the UK. So now suddenly it is subject to tariffs and duties. Now you can take that issue away by having it put in a bonded warehouse and so on, or effectively having full visibility to supply chain all the way back. But to be clear, Kieran, most won't want, because they'll see the margins and so on. So that's kind of one example I could see really cropping up quite quickly when things really open up, because suddenly it'll be like, well, hang on, we thought this was okay because it's really an Italian product or a French X or Y. Another one, and I think we've just touched on it a few minutes ago, is about people bringing it in from overseas. So let's say you already had an electrical distributor, maybe, for example, in the UK, and they were servicing both the Irish and UK market, and they were bringing electrical and lighting and stuff like that from China, Far East, wherever it is. Up to now, there was duties on the way in. That's fine, but that was the EU duties in a UK context. And that distributor was looking at two markets. It was looking at Ireland and the UK, but the UK market might be making up 90% of that guy's sales, whereas the Irish market could be making up 5 or 10%. Now, when they sell it into Ireland, or when looking for it to pull it down off the warehouse in the UK, that's arguably going to get a second bite of duty coming from the UK duties on that, coming from China into the UK now. So unless that distributor is willing to put a bonded warehouse in place and kind of ring fence it away and say, right, hang on, we'll duty suspend this because it's coming from China into the UK, but ultimately it's going to end up in Ireland, you're going to be hit with kind of, undue costs and implications. And the reality here is, if you go and talk to someone like that with 5% of the market, and I think we've talked about it here, whereby Ireland to some degree is a little bit of a taker in this, within reason, because we're small. But, that distributor might be saying, it's not worth me doing all that for the sake of 5 or 10% of my market, in reality, to try and appease my customer in Ireland. So again, it's knowing these things, because until they really crop up. So I liked round one of, prepare. It's spot on. And that bit of time we have at the moment, because if it's till the 5th of April, I'd be lifting the phone. I'd be understanding exactly when it goes live. What is my implications going to be,
Yeah. So it seems to be that the general consensus across the panel definitely seems to be coming in around preparation, and proper preparation and organization could be the key here. We're just about 5 minutes left, so I think let's be fair to the questions that are coming in. Let's see if we pick out a couple that they haven't been directed at anyone, so I might just Michael, just out of just at your top of my screen here, we just throw this one at yourself.
Give the hard one.
Yeah. So there's one there again. Sorry, I'm just randomly going to pick these out. So, and I work as an office manager for a construction firm, but I'm also a translator with French and German. Do you feel that Irish firms might be reluctant to engage directly with suppliers on the continent due to the language barrier?
I would say personally no, because I work for an international organization. So we deal with operating companies in Germany and the Netherlands and Italy and France and so on. I probably better passing that one to Paul or Ronan instead.
Oh, we're passing them around.
Kieran, for me, I would say no. I think, unlike, I'll probably speak for myself here, bar English, and I'm bad at that. That's as good as it gets. But most Europeans have 4 or 5 languages, and definitely put me to shame. So, wanting to deal with a German, a Dutch or a French company, there will be someone in there who will speak probably better English than me. And they are more than willing to deal if it's something that's possible for both parties. So I don't see it being a huge difficulty.
Okay, there's another one there. Then let's see. We'll read it out and see who's best. So, buying early for smaller firms. This is from Kevin Burke. Buying early for smaller firms is not a viable. Cash flow issues, storage, insurance, and stocks. Many items are imported directly. Many items are imported direct to site, not to a warehouse. Any thoughts on that? So, general thoughts on that particular point. Anybody? Let's put it out there. Seems you're passing them around. It doesn't matter who I point them at.
Direct to site and how that I get the ability to pay for something or order something in advance, the invoice, and not using in 3 months' time. I do understand that is a more difficult issue for the smaller contractor. But stuff being direct to site, how that's going to affect the cost. If it's a commodity item, it's the price on the day, or the month. It really doesn't matter whether it goes to a warehouse or direct onto site. Okay, of course, there's a distribution cost, and we all know a truckload of something is always less than three sheets. But I can't see, bar from a cash flow perspective, there being any huge advantage.
Okay.
And maybe Kieran, just one thought, slightly off, but to the cash flow point though, it is about getting the VAT right. Okay, so like the Irish government and brought in effectively postponed accounting. So what that means is when you import the goods in, you can delay your VAT point until such time as you're filling in your own VAT return. Yeah. Now we're seeing these and even logistics companies not getting that right. So, and therefore, to get it out of customs, you got to pay the VAT up front. Now, that is a real cash flow because you're paying it now, and you might be claiming it back, the VAT refund in 3 weeks' time or in a month's time or 2 months' time. But if you can put it all in and out on your VAT return, it never becomes a cash flow cost. So, and that's happening from the big guys right down to the small guys, just knowing that it's there and it is available. But again, it's engagement. It's getting up with your broker, your customs broker.
Yeah, Kieran, I'll just hop back in on that one if you don't mind. Like that, what Colin says there, that is key. We've had 1 or 2 brokers who are really poor and don't know what forms and what boxes to tick. And we've had 3 or 4 that are absolutely excellent, ticking the right boxes, making sure everything's right. And yeah, that postponement of VAT 3 months down the road or 2 months down the road is as important for us as it is for a small, medium or large builder. And as Colin said, that engagement with a customs broker, a good customs broker, is going to be key. And and John mentioned it too, and I think there's one to take into mind. A lot of the haulier firms actually have their own internal customs, and that works really well because if there's a delay in transport, it's their problem. It's not your problem. And using those guys, I learned that. I used one guy independently, and I had hauliers giving out to me that this wasn't ready and that wasn't ready. Give it to the haulier. They can do it, and they'll do everything for you. It's going to cost. There is a cost, but it will take that stress of, the truck's sitting here for 7 hours and there's no paperwork. That becomes their problem.
Fair play. There's loads to take in there and plenty of good stuff in there. There is other questions and apologies, just if anyone there that has popped questions in, just email them over to me, Kieran@livecost.com, and I'll send you on the lads' phone numbers and you can ring them all. No, all good. Let me just throw a few thanks out there. The CIF, obviously, they help put these things on, and it really helps us as a small business. Any help we can get really does come in handy. The panel who've kindly put the time into this, really appreciate it. So Michael, Ronan, Paul, Colin and John who had to duck off, thanks very much, really appreciate it. Anyone that's attended, thanks very much. And also there will be a recording of this, so if anyone needs it, let me know if you want to share it out with others that you think might find that value. Other than that, thanks very much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kieran.
Thank you.
Thanks, cheers.
Thanks,
Kieran.
Bye bye.
Thanks all.
Bye bye.